Have you ever helped someone without expecting anything back? In the heart of East Atlanta, where hope often comes served on cracked plates and kindness costs more than most can afford, a waitress named Keisha Williams was about to learn that sometimes the smallest acts of love can echo across decades. She had no way of knowing that feeding 3 hungry children on the coldest night of winter would change not just their lives, but hers forever. Because 20 years later, when that helicopter touched down in front of her modest home, she'd discover that kindness, real, selfless kindness, never truly disappears. It just grows wings. Hey there, my beautiful family and friends. Welcome back. If you're ready to settle in for another unforgettable story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hearing from you, no matter where you are in the world, always makes my day. And hey, if you enjoy this one, stay tuned because there are always more powerful stories on the way, and you definitely don't want to miss them. Before we begin, do me a favor, like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone you love. You never know whose heart this story might touch. Now, let me take a moment to speak into your life. I pray that whatever burden you're carrying, you find peace that passes all understanding. I pray that in the quiet moments when no one sees your tears, God sees you and comforts you. I pray for healing over every broken piece of your heart and strength to rise again no matter how many times life has knocked you down. May joy find its way back to you, even if you've forgotten what it feels like. May your faith be reignited, your spirit lifted, and may love, real, deep, unconditional love, surround you wherever you are right now. You're not forgotten, you're not invisible, and you're not alone. This community is your safe space, and this story, like all the others, is here to remind you just how powerful your journey truly is. Now take a deep breath, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's story. The fluorescent lights of Ruby's diner buzzed with the same tired persistence as Keisha Williams' worn-out sneakers against the checkered linoleum floor. At 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday that felt more like a punishment than a day of the week, she wiped down the same counter for the 100th time, her movements automatic after 6 years of late-night shifts that bled into early morning desperation. "Table 4 wants another coffee refill," called Jerry from behind the grill, his gruff voice carrying the weight of someone who'd been flipping burgers since before Keisha was born. The coffee pot felt heavier in her hands than it should have. Everything felt heavier lately. She forced a smile as she approached the lone customer at table 4, a truck driver whose eyes carried the same exhaustion she felt in her bones. "Here you go, honey. You driving through the night. Got to make Jacksonville by morning," he said, wrapping his weathered hands around the warm mug. "You look tired, miss. When's your shift end?" 6 a.m., Keisha replied, tucking a strand of her carefully maintained hair back into her ponytail. Even working double shifts, she took pride in her appearance. Her mother had taught her that dignity wasn't something poverty could steal unless you let it. The truth was, Keisha's shift at Ruby's never really ended. After her 6 a.m. finish, she'd drive her 15-year-old Honda Civic across town to her day job at the medical office, where she answered phones and filed insurance claims until 3 in the afternoon. Then home to check on her 8-year-old daughter Jasmine, help with homework, make dinner from whatever was left in their nearly empty refrigerator, and somehow find the energy to be the mother her little girl deserved. The math never worked. 70 hours a week between both jobs, and she still came up short every month. The eviction notice taped to her apartment door this morning was just the latest reminder that working hard and doing right didn't always add up to enough. "Excuse me, miss?" The truck driver's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "You all right?" Keisha blinked, realizing she'd been standing there, coffee pot in hand, staring at nothing. "I'm fine, just thinking. You need anything else?" "No, ma'am, just this." He placed a $10 bill on the table for a $4.50 meal. "Keep the change. And get yourself some rest when you can." As she cleared his table 20 minutes later, Keisha felt the familiar sting behind her eyes that came with unexpected kindness. $5.50 might not sound like much, but it meant Jasmine could have chocolate milk with her lunch tomorrow instead of just the free meal from the school program. The diner grew quiet as the last customer left. Jerry had already started cleaning the grill, the scraping of his spatula against metal providing a rhythm to the night's end. Outside, Atlanta's November wind rattled the windows, and Keisha could see her breath when she stepped outside to take the trash to the dumpster. The cold hit her like a physical blow. Winter in Georgia might not be as harsh as up north, but when you couldn't afford to keep the heat on at home, Cold was cold. She pulled her thin jacket tighter and hurried toward the dumpster behind the building, eager to get back inside. That's when she heard them. Voices. Quiet, desperate whispers coming from behind the dumpster. Children's voices. Keisha froze, her heart immediately racing. It was nearly 3 a.m. What were children doing out here? I'm still hungry, a small voice said. I know, Maya, but there's nothing else, replied another voice, older but still clearly a child. Maybe there's something in the bottom, suggested a third voice. Keisha crept closer, her sneakers silent against the asphalt. What she saw made her stomach clench with a mixture of horror and heartbreak. 3 children, maybe 8 or 9 years old, were digging through the diner's dumpster. They were clearly siblings, triplets, she realized, with the same wide eyes and thin faces. Their clothes were layers of mismatched items, probably gathered from various sources, and none of it looked warm enough for the dropping temperature. The first child, a boy, was standing on an overturned crate, reaching deep into the dumpster and passing items down to his sisters. One girl was organizing whatever food scraps they found, while the other kept watch. Excuse me, Keisha said softly, not wanting to startle them. All 3 children spun around, fear immediately filling their faces. The boy jumped down from the crate, positioning himself protectively in front of his sisters. We weren't doing nothing wrong, he said, his chin raised defiantly despite the tremor in his voice. This is trash. Nobody wants it. What are your names? Keisha asked gently, crouching down to their eye level. The children exchanged glances. The boy seemed to be the spokesperson. I'm Marcus. This is Maya and Miles. Where are your parents, Marcus? Don't got none, he said simply. Just us. Keisha felt something crack inside her chest. These babies were out here alone, digging through garbage for food, and it was almost freezing. How long have you been on your own? Few months, Marcus replied, still wary. We take care of ourselves. Maya, one of the girls, stepped forward slightly. She was shivering visibly. Are you going to call the police on us? No, baby. I'm not calling anybody. Keisha stood up slowly. But you all look cold and hungry. How about you come inside where it's warm? We don't got money, Miles, the other boy, said quietly. Did I ask for money? Keisha smiled. Come on. Let's get you warmed up. She watched the internal debate play across Marcus's face. He was clearly the leader, the protector, and he was weighing the risks. Finally, hunger and cold won out. Just for a minute, he said. To get warm. Keisha led them through the back door of the diner. Jerry looked up from the grill, his eyebrows raising at the sight of the 3 children. Found them outside, Keisha explained. They're cold and hungry. Jerry studied the children for a moment, then nodded toward the corner booth. Sit them down. I'll make them something to eat. Jerry, I don't have, Keisha started. Did I ask you for money? Jerry interrupted, echoing her words to the children. Sit them down. The triplets slid into the red vinyl booth, their eyes wide as they took in the warmth of the diner. Keisha could see them starting to thaw out, literally and figuratively. When's the last time you all had a real meal? She asked, sliding in across from them. Sunday, Maya answered. The church gave out sandwiches. That was 4 days ago, Keisha said, her heart breaking further. We had some crackers yesterday, Marcus added quickly, as if he needed to prove they were managing. Jerry appeared with 3 plates piled high with scrambled eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast. The children stared at the food like they couldn't believe it was real. Go ahead, Keisha encouraged. Eat. They fell on the food with the quiet desperation of children who had learned that meals weren't guaranteed. Keisha watched them eat, noting how thin they were, how their clothes hung loose on their small frames. These babies were literally starving. Where do you sleep? She asked gently. Different places, Marcus answered between bites. Under the bridge sometimes. There's a place behind the grocery store that's not too bad. It's going to be really cold tonight, Keisha said. Like really cold. The children exchanged looks. They knew. Keisha felt the weight of the $12 in her pocket, her tips from the night, money she'd already mentally allocated to gas, and a small grocery run. She thought about the eviction notice on her door, about Jasmine's needs, about all the reasons why she should walk away and let someone else worry about these children. Instead, she thought about Jasmine, safe and warm in their apartment, complaining about having to eat generic cereal instead of the name brand. She thought about what her mother would have done. She thought about what she'd want someone to do if Jasmine was ever alone and scared and hungry. Jerry, she called. Can you make them each a sandwich to take with them? And maybe wrap up some of those cookies. Already on it, Jerry replied from behind the counter. Keisha stood up and walked to the coat closet by the employee entrance. Her jacket was thin, but it was better than what the children had. She also grabbed the small blanket she kept for when the diner got too cold during her breaks. Here, she said, draping her jacket around Maya's shoulders and handing the blanket to Miles. This will help keep you warm. But then you'll be cold, Maya protested. I'll be fine. I'm going home soon where it's warm. The lie came easily. Her apartment wasn't much warmer than outside, but these children needed hope more than truth. Marcus was studying her with ancient eyes in a young face. Why are you helping us? Because you need help, Keisha said simply. And because every child deserves to have someone care about them. Jerry brought over a bag with the sandwiches and cookies, along with 3 small cartons of milk. For later, he said gruffly. The children finished eating and reluctantly prepared to leave. At the door, Marcus turned back. Thank you, he said, and the simple words carried the weight of a lifetime of gratitude. You take care of each other, Keisha replied. And Marcus, if you're ever really scared, or if something happens, you come back here, okay? Even if I'm not working, you tell whoever's here that Keisha said to take care of you. He nodded solemnly, and then the 3 children disappeared into the November night, carrying with them more than just food and warmth. They carried the knowledge that someone somewhere gave a damn about whether they lived or died. Keisha watched them go, her heart heavy with worry and the knowledge that she'd probably never see them again. She couldn't save every hungry child in Atlanta, couldn't fix the system that let babies fall through the cracks, couldn't even fix her own problems. But she could feed 3 children on a cold night. She could show them that kindness existed in the world. She could plant a seed of hope in the darkness and trust that somehow, someday, it might grow into something beautiful. As she walked to her car in the bitter cold, wearing only her thin work uniform, Keisha Williams had no idea that she'd just changed the course of 3 lives forever. She couldn't know that 20 years later, those same children would remember every detail of this night, the taste of the scrambled eggs, the warmth of her jacket, the way she looked at them like they mattered. All she knew was that she'd done what felt right, even when she couldn't afford to, even when it meant she'd go home cold, even when it meant her own problems would still be waiting for her in the morning. Because some things mattered more than money. Some things mattered more than fear. Some things mattered more than the endless struggle to just survive another day. Love mattered. Kindness mattered. And sometimes, in the darkest moments, that had to be enough. The cold November air cut through Keisha's thin uniform like a blade as she drove home, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles ached. Without her jacket, the Honda's broken heater felt even more useless, and she could see her breath forming small clouds in the darkness. But every time the cold threatened to make her regret her decision, she thought about Maya's small face when she'd wrapped that jacket around her shoulders. The way the little girl's eyes had widened, not just with surprise, but with something deeper. Recognition, maybe. The understanding that someone cared enough to sacrifice their own comfort. What would you do in this situation? The question echoed in her mind as she pulled into the parking lot of Magnolia Gardens, the apartment complex that generously called itself affordable housing, despite eating up 3/4 of her monthly income. The eviction notice was still taped to her door, its bold red letters a harsh reminder that kindness was a luxury she technically couldn't afford. Keisha carefully removed it, not wanting Jasmine to see it when she woke up for school. Inside, their small 2-bedroom apartment was barely warmer than the car had been. She couldn't remember the last time she'd been able to keep the thermostat above 62 degrees. Jasmine was sleeping peacefully under every blanket they owned, her 8-year-old face smooth and innocent in the dim light filtering through their thin curtains. Keisha touched her daughter's forehead, warm, safe, fed. Whatever mistakes she'd made in life, whatever struggles she faced, she'd managed to keep this one perfect thing protected. She changed out of her uniform and slipped under the covers beside Jasmine, trying not to wake her. But sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw 3 pairs of young eyes staring up at her with desperate hope. She wondered if they'd found somewhere safe to sleep, if her jacket was keeping Maya warm enough, if the sandwiches Jerry had made would last them through tomorrow. The next evening at Ruby's diner, Keisha found herself glancing toward the back door every few minutes, hoping against hope that the triplets might return. Jerry noticed her distraction as she wiped down the same table for the 3rd time. "You thinking about those kids?" he asked, refilling the ketchup bottles. "Can't stop thinking about them," Keisha admitted. "They were so thin, Jerry. And so scared, but trying so hard to be brave. You did what you could, Jerry said gently. More than most would have done, but it didn't feel like enough. As her shift wound down, Keisha made a decision that would have seemed crazy to anyone who knew about her eviction notice. She asked Jerry to make 3 more meals, simple but filling, and pack them to go. You sure about this? Jerry asked, but he was already reaching for the plates. No, Keisha said honestly, but I'm going to do it anyway. After closing, instead of driving straight home, Keisha drove slowly through the neighborhoods surrounding the diner. She checked behind the grocery store Marcus had mentioned, under overpasses in the doorways of closed businesses. For 2 hours, she searched with growing desperation until finally, around 4 a.m., she spotted them. They were huddled together behind an abandoned gas station, the 3 of them wrapped in her jacket and blanket, using a piece of cardboard as a buffer against the concrete. Maya was in the middle, with both boys positioned protectively on either side. Even in sleep, they were taking care of each other. Keisha sat in her car for a moment, watching them. They looked impossibly small and vulnerable, 3 children who should have been safe in warm beds, dreaming of toys and cartoons instead of survival. Her heart physically ached. She approached quietly, not wanting to startle them awake. But Marcus's eyes opened immediately. He was clearly a light sleeper, trained by necessity to be alert to danger. Miss Keisha, he whispered, sitting up carefully so as not to wake his siblings. Hey, baby, she said softly. I brought you some food. Marcus shook Maya and Miles gently. Wake up. The nice lady from the restaurant is here. The other 2 children stirred, and Maya smiled when she saw Keisha, the first real smile Keisha had seen from any of them. We kept your jacket safe, Maya said, starting to take it off. No, honey, you keep it, Keisha said. I brought you dinner. She handed them the bag of food, watching as they divided everything equally without discussion. These children had learned to share everything, to take care of each other with a maturity that broke her heart. Miss Keisha, Miles said quietly, why do you keep helping us? It was such a simple question, but it made Keisha pause. She thought about the eviction notice, about her own struggles, about all the reasons why she should be focusing on her own problems. Because, she said finally, a long time ago, when I was about your age, I was scared and hungry too. And a woman at the church, Mrs. Patterson, she saw me stealing crackers from the fellowship hall. Instead of getting me in trouble, she sat me down and made me a plate of food. She asked me about my mama, about where I was living, about whether I had what I needed. The children listened intently as Keisha continued. Mrs. Patterson didn't have much more than we did, but she made sure I had food every day after school. She helped my mama find a better job. She's the reason I graduated high school. Keisha's voice grew soft with memory. She told me something I'll never forget. Baby, we take care of each other. That's how we survive. That's how we do more than just survive. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding in his eyes. So you're taking care of us like she took care of you. That's right, Keisha said. And someday, when you're grown up and strong, you'll take care of someone else who needs it. We will, Maya said solemnly. We promise. Over the next week, this became their routine. Keisha would finish her shift at Ruby's, pack meals, and drive around until she found the triplets. Sometimes they were in the same spot. Sometimes she had to search. But she always found them, and she always made sure they had food. She learned their story in pieces. Their parents had died in a car accident 8 months ago. They'd been placed with a great-aunt who died suddenly just a few weeks later. Instead of going back into the system, which Marcus remembered as a nightmare of separated placements and cruel foster families, they'd run away and had been living on the streets ever since. We stay together, Marcus explained with fierce determination. Whatever happens, we don't get split up. Keisha understood. Family wasn't just about blood. It was about the people who refused to let you face the world alone. On Thursday night, when she found them behind the public library, Maya was running a fever. She was trying to hide it, but Keisha could see the flush in her cheeks, the glassy look in her eyes. Baby, you're sick, Keisha said, touching Maya's forehead. I'm okay, Maya insisted, but she was clearly not okay. Keisha looked at the 3 children, at Marcus's worried face, at Miles hovering protectively near his sister. She thought about her apartment with its broken heater, about the eviction notice, about all the reasons why what she was about to do was impossible. Come on, she said. You're coming home with me tonight. We can't, Marcus started. Yes, you can, Keisha said firmly. Maya needs to be somewhere warm, and you all need a real night's sleep. No arguments. The drive to her apartment was quiet, but Keisha could feel the children's mixture of gratitude and disbelief. When was the last time they'd been inside a real home? At her apartment, Keisha settled Maya on the couch with extra blankets while she made soup from a can of chicken noodle she'd been saving. Marcus and Miles sat quietly at her small kitchen table, their eyes wide as they took in the normal details of everyday life. Family photos on the refrigerator, Jasmine's schoolwork displayed on the counter, the comfortable clutter of a home where people were loved. "This is where you live?" Miles asked softly. "This is home," Keisha confirmed, stirring the soup. When Jasmine woke up and found 3 strange children in their living room, Keisha held her breath. But her daughter, with the easy acceptance of childhood, simply introduced herself and asked if they wanted to see her collection of pretty rocks. That night, Keisha gave up her bed to the triplets and slept on the floor beside the couch where Maya was recovering. She listened to their quiet breathing, to the way they whispered good night to each other, to the sound of children finally feeling safe enough to truly sleep. In the morning, she made them breakfast, real breakfast, with eggs and toast and orange juice, and watched them eat with the same quiet desperation she'd seen that first night. But there was something different now. They were looking at her differently. Not just with gratitude, but with something deeper. Love, maybe. Trust, definitely. "We have to go," Marcus said after breakfast, though it was clear he didn't want to. "I know," Keisha said. "But Marcus, I need you to promise me something." He nodded. "If Maya gets sick again, if any of you get hurt, if you're ever really scared, you come here. You don't try to tough it out on your own. You come here, okay?" "But we don't want to be trouble," Miles said. "You're not trouble," Keisha said, crouching down to their level. "You're children, and children are never trouble when they need help." She packed them sandwiches and gave them each a warm sweatshirt, one of hers and 2 that Jasmine had outgrown. As they prepared to leave, Maya threw her arms around Keisha's waist. "I love you, Miss Keisha," she whispered. Keisha felt tears spring to her eyes. "I love you too, baby. All of you." After they left, Jasmine looked at her mother with curious eyes. "Mama, are we poor like those kids?" Keisha considered the question. They were poor, certainly. The eviction notice was still a reality, the bills were still unpaid, the future was still uncertain. But they had each other, they had a home, they had hope. "We don't have a lot of money," Keisha said carefully. "But we're rich in the things that matter most." "Like love?" Jasmine asked. "Like love," Keisha confirmed. That afternoon, as she got ready for another double shift, Keisha caught sight of herself in the bathroom mirror. She looked tired, stressed, worn down by the constant struggle to make ends meet. But there was something else in her reflection, a sense of purpose, maybe. The knowledge that she was making a difference, even if it was just for 3 children who had nowhere else to turn. Her phone rang as she was leaving for work. The number on the screen made her stomach clench, her landlord. "Mrs. Williams." The voice was businesslike but not unkind. "I wanted to follow up on the eviction notice. Do you have the money you owe?" Keisha closed her eyes. Between feeding the triplets and missing hours at work to take care of Maya, she was even further behind than before. "Mr. Henderson, I need a little more time. I'm working double shifts, and I should have most of it by." "I'm sorry," he interrupted, "but I've already been more than patient. You have until Friday to pay in full, or I'll have to proceed with the eviction." "Friday. 3 days away." "I understand," Keisha said quietly. After she hung up, she sat in her car for a moment, feeling the weight of impossible choices. She could stop helping the triplets, could focus entirely on her own survival. It would be the practical thing to do, the sensible thing. Instead, she drove to Ruby's diner, where Jerry was already prepping for the dinner rush. "You okay?" he asked, noting her expression. "Just thinking," she said, tying her apron. "Jerry, if something happens to me, if I can't work here anymore, will you still look out for those kids if they come around?" Jerry studied her face. "Keisha, what's going on?" "Just promise me," she said. "I promise," Jerry said. "But nothing's going to happen to you. You're tougher than you think." As Keisha began her shift, serving coffee and wiping down tables, she carried with her the memory of Maya's fever breaking in the night, of Marcus's rare smile when he'd seen Jasmine's rock collection, of Miles quietly helping clear the breakfast dishes without being asked. She'd given them more than food and shelter. She'd given them the knowledge that they mattered, that someone in the world cared whether they lived or died. She'd planted seeds of hope in soil that had known only hardship. And somehow, even facing eviction, even staring at her own uncertain future, that felt like enough. Not because it solved everything, but because it was the right thing to do. Because Mrs. Patterson had been right all those years ago. We take care of each other. That's how we survive. That's how we do more than just survive. That's how we become more than just survivors. That's how we become human. Friday came like a storm Keisha had been watching on the horizon but couldn't escape. She stood in the parking lot of Magnolia Gardens at 6 p.m., holding the eviction papers the sheriff had just served, watching her entire life packed into garbage bags and cardboard boxes stacked beside her ancient Honda. Jasmine sat on one of the boxes, her 8-year-old legs swinging nervously as she clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit. "Where are we going to sleep tonight, Mama?" Keisha folded the papers carefully and slid them into her purse, buying herself a moment to think. She had $47 in her wallet, a car that might not start tomorrow, and a daughter who was trying so hard to be brave that it made Keisha's chest ache. "We're going to figure it out, baby," she said, forcing confidence into her voice. "We always do." The truth was, she had no idea. The homeless shelter downtown had a waiting list 2 weeks long. Her sister in Birmingham had made it clear that Keisha and Jasmine weren't welcome after the loan Keisha had never been able to repay. Her mother had been gone for 3 years now, taking with her the last safety net Keisha had ever known. As she loaded their belongings into and onto her car, creating a mobile home that would have to do for tonight, Keisha found herself thinking about the triplets. Had they been this scared when they first found themselves with nowhere to go? Had Marcus felt this same crushing weight of responsibility, knowing that every decision he made would affect not just his own survival, but his siblings as well? She'd seen them twice more since Maya's fever broke. Once behind the library, where they'd been trying to stay warm around a small fire built in a trash can, and once near the bus station, where they'd apparently learned they could use the public restroom and sometimes get leftover sandwiches from the coffee shop. Each time, she'd brought them food, and each time, they'd asked about her and Jasmine with a genuine concern that made her heart swell, even as her own world crumbled. "Miss Keisha," Marcus had said just 2 nights ago, "you look tired. Are you taking care of yourself?" Such an adult question from a child's mouth. It had taken everything in her not to laugh or cry. Now, sitting in her car in a McDonald's parking lot as Jasmine ate a happy meal that represented a significant portion of their remaining money, Keisha wondered if the triplets would even remember her kindness years from now. Would it matter, in the grand scheme of their lives? Would those few warm meals and that single night of safety make any real difference? Her phone buzzed with a text from Jerry. "Heard about the eviction. You and Jasmine can crash at my place tonight." Couch pulls out into a bed. Keisha closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the kindness of a man who barely knew her outside of work but was willing to open his home without question. She typed back, "Thank you. We'll be there around 9. Jerry's apartment was a small 1-bedroom above a Korean restaurant, filled with the comfortable clutter of someone who'd lived alone for 20 years. He made up the pull-out couch with fresh sheets and gave Jasmine a box of crayons and some paper to keep her occupied while the adults talked. "This is temporary," Keisha said as they sat at his small kitchen table, drinking coffee that was stronger and better than anything they served at Ruby's. "Just until I can figure out what comes next." "Stay as long as you need," Jerry said simply. "But can I ask you something?" Keisha nodded. "Why haven't you applied for assistance?" "There are programs." "I've applied for everything," Keisha interrupted, exhaustion making her voice flat. "I'm on 14 different waiting lists. I make too much money to qualify for some things, not enough to actually live on. It's like being stuck in the middle of nowhere with no road leading out." Jerry was quiet for a moment. "What about those kids you've been helping? Anyone ever ask you why you're feeding hungry children when you can barely feed yourself?" Keisha looked toward the living room, where Jasmine was drawing a picture of a house with flowers in the front yard. The kind of home they'd never lived in, but that existed in her daughter's hopeful imagination. "My mama used to say that being poor wasn't an excuse for being selfish," Keisha said finally. "Those babies were hungrier than we were. They were colder than we were. They needed help more than we needed that money." She shrugged. "Sometimes doing right isn't about whether you can afford it. Sometimes it's about whether you can afford not to. Your mama sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was," Keisha said softly. "She cleaned houses for rich folks in Buckhead for 30 years. Never made more than minimum wage, but she sponsored 3 families through the church's food pantry every Christmas. Said it was her job to make sure the light of kindness didn't go out in the world." Meanwhile, 15 miles across the city, 3 children were huddled together in an abandoned building that had once been a community center. But they weren't just surviving anymore. They were planning. She got kicked out of her house, Maya said, her voice thick with the weight of adult concerns no 8-year-old should carry. How do you know? Miles asked. I saw her loading boxes into her car this afternoon. She looked really sad. Marcus, who had appointed himself their leader and protector, felt a familiar fire in his chest. She helped us when we had nothing. Now she needs help. But what can we do? Miles asked practically. We don't have money or a house or anything. Marcus thought about this for a long moment. At 8 years old, he was already learning that powerlessness was just another kind of prison. But he was also learning something else, that kindness created connections, and connections created possibilities. Maybe we can't help her with money, he said slowly. But we can help her other ways. We can watch her back. We can make sure she knows she's not alone. Over the next several weeks, the triplets became Keisha's invisible guardian angels. They learned her schedule, her routes, the places she went, and the times she went there. When her car broke down outside the medical office where she worked her day job, they were the ones who flagged down help. When a drunk man started bothering her as she walked to her car after a late shift, they created enough noise and distraction to send him stumbling away. Keisha never knew they were there, watching over her the way she had watched over them. They also began asking questions. Careful questions to people in the neighborhood, piecing together information about the woman who had shown them more kindness than the rest of the world combined. From Mrs. Chun at the corner store. Miss Keisha? Oh, honey, she's good people. Always polite. Always has a smile even when you can tell she's having a hard day. Her little girl is sweet as pie too. From the bus driver on Route 15. She takes the early bus to that medical office downtown, then catches the late one back before her dinner shift. Works more hours than anyone should have to. Never complains, though. Always says thank you. From the other waitresses at Ruby's. Keisha? She's the one you want working your shift if you get sick. She'll cover for you without asking questions, share her tips if you're having a bad night. She's got a good heart, maybe too good for her own good sometimes. The picture that emerged was of a woman who gave more than she had, who treated everyone with dignity regardless of how they treated her, who worked impossible hours and somehow still found energy to be a good mother to her daughter. She saved our lives, Maya said one evening as they shared a meal of sandwiches they'd bought with money earned from returning cans and bottles. She did more than that, Marcus replied, understanding something his siblings were still too young to grasp. She saved our souls. She showed us that we're worth saving. Miles, who was quieter than his siblings but perhaps the most observant, had been carrying a secret. 3 days earlier, while hiding from a security guard near the downtown library, he'd overheard 2 social workers talking. The Henderson triplets, one had said. They've been missing for almost a year now. Family's still looking for them. Henderson? The other had replied. Not the same Henderson family that. Yeah, the civil rights leader. These are his great-grandchildren. The family's offering a substantial reward for information leading to their recovery. Miles had said nothing to his siblings about this conversation. The word family was complicated for them. They'd learned not to trust adults who claimed to want to help. But somewhere in the back of his young mind, a seed of possibility had been planted. What if there were people looking for them? People who actually cared? People who might understand that staying together was more important than any comfortable placement that would split them up? But for now, those questions could wait. For now, their focus was on the woman who had fed them when they were hungry, who had given them her coat when they were cold, who had shown them that kindness existed in a world that had seemed determined to prove otherwise. They didn't know about compound interest or investment returns, or the way small acts of love could grow into something magnificent over time. They only knew that Keisha Williams had looked at 3 dirty, desperate children and seen human beings worthy of care. They were 8 years old, powerless and homeless, with no resources beyond their fierce loyalty to each other. But they had learned something important from Keisha's example. You take care of the people who take care of you. You don't forget kindness. You don't let good people face their battles alone. Somewhere in their young hearts, a promise was taking shape. Someday, when they were bigger and stronger and had something to offer, they would find a way to repay the debt of love they owed to a waitress who had saved their lives with scrambled eggs and genuine compassion. Someday, they would make sure Keisha Williams understood that her kindness had not gone unnoticed, unappreciated, or unrewarded. Someday was a long way off. But someday was coming. And when it arrived, It would come with the sound of helicopter blades and the fulfillment of a promise that had been growing in 3 young hearts for 20 years. The promise that love, real love, never truly dies. It just waits for the right moment to come home. Winter deepened into February, and the triplets had become students of Keisha Williams in ways she never could have imagined. They studied her like scholars examining a rare manuscript, cataloging every act of kindness, every moment of grace under pressure, every choice that revealed the depth of her character. Marcus had developed a system. Each morning, he would assign himself and his siblings different observation posts along Keisha's daily route. Maya would position herself near the bus stop, where Keisha caught the 6:47 a.m. to her day job. Miles would stake out the area around Ruby's diner. Marcus himself would rotate between locations, always staying hidden but always watching. What they discovered was a woman whose kindness wasn't performance. It was simply who she was. On a Tuesday morning when the temperature dropped to 18 degrees, Maya watched from behind a newspaper stand as Keisha waited for the bus. An elderly homeless man approached the bus stop, shivering violently in clothes that were more holes than fabric. Without hesitation, Keisha removed her own scarf, a thin thing that probably provided little warmth anyway, and offered it to the man along with the banana she'd been saving for lunch. "God bless you, sister," the old man had said, and Keisha's response was barely audible, but Maya caught it. "We all need blessings sometimes." The bus arrived, and Keisha climbed aboard without her scarf, without her lunch, apparently unbothered by either loss. Maya followed the bus route on foot for 6 blocks, watching through the windows as Keisha gave up her seat to a pregnant woman and helped a mother with her stroller. At Ruby's diner, Miles witnessed different but equally telling moments. He watched Keisha work a double shift on her day off because another waitress had called in sick. He saw her split her lunch with a customer who was obviously broke, pretending she was too full to finish eating so the man wouldn't feel like charity. He observed her staying late to help Jerry clean up after a busy rush, refusing the extra pay he tried to give her. "Keep it for the next person who needs help," she'd told Jerry, and Miles understood that this wasn't just about refusing money. It was about seeing Jerry's kindness as part of a larger circle that needed to keep flowing. But it was Marcus who witnessed the moment that would change everything. 3 weeks after the eviction, while Keisha was still staying with Jerry and looking for a new apartment she could afford, Marcus was following her route home from the medical office when he saw her stop at Grady Hospital. She'd gotten a call during her shift. He'd seen her face go pale as she answered her phone. From his hiding spot behind a pillar in the hospital lobby, Marcus watched Keisha rush to the pediatric ward. Through the glass doors, he could see her embracing a woman who was crying. They talked for several minutes, and then Keisha was following a doctor down the hallway. Marcus waited, and waited. Hours passed. Finally, near midnight, he saw Keisha emerge from the elevator looking exhausted. She walked to the billing office, where she spent another hour. When she finally left the hospital, Marcus followed her to the parking lot, staying hidden in the shadows. Keisha sat in her car for a long time, just staring at the steering wheel. Then she pulled out her phone and made a call. "Jerry, I know it's late. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Can you cover my shifts for the next few days? I know it's a lot to ask." Her voice broke. "My cousin's little boy is sick. Really sick. And she can't afford. Jerry, they want $3,500 just for the surgery deposit." Marcus couldn't hear Jerry's response, but he could see Keisha nodding. "I don't know," she was saying. "I've got maybe 200 in savings. I can pick up extra shifts somewhere else, maybe get a loan. I just can't let that baby suffer because we don't have money." When she hung up, Keisha rested her head against the steering wheel and cried. Not the quiet tears Marcus had seen other adults shed, but the deep, body-racking sobs of someone who was drowning and still trying to save everyone else. The next day, Marcus made a decision that would reveal more about the triplets' true situation than they had ever intended to share. He found Miles and Maya at their usual meeting spot behind the abandoned community center and called an emergency council. "We have to help her," he announced. "How?" Maya asked. "We barely have enough money for food." "Not with money," Marcus said. "With information." He told them what he'd overheard about their family name, about the reward being offered for their return. He explained what he'd learned by eavesdropping on social workers and police officers. They weren't just random homeless children. They were the great-grandchildren of James Henderson, the civil rights leader whose legacy had established one of the largest educational foundations in the South. Our great-grandpa? Miles asked, his eyes wide. That's what they said. And there are people looking for us. Rich people. People who could help Miss Keisha if they knew what she did for us. Maya shook her head. But what if they separate us? What if they put us in different homes? It was the fear that had kept them on the streets for almost a year. The terror of being split up, of losing the only family they had left. What if they don't? Marcus countered. What if our real family is different? What if they understand that we belong together? They debated for hours, weighing their own safety against their desire to help the woman who had saved them. Finally, it was Miles who provided the solution. What if we test them first, he suggested. What if we find a way to contact our family without telling them where we are? We can see if they really care about us, or if they just want to check us off some list. It took them 3 days to work up the courage and develop a plan. Using a pay phone outside a gas station, Marcus placed a call to the Henderson Foundation, his 8-year-old voice carefully disguised to sound older. "This is about the missing Henderson children," he said when the receptionist answered. "Please hold," came the immediate response, and Marcus was transferred so quickly it made his head spin. "This is Rebecca Henderson," said a woman's voice, warm and urgent. "Are you calling about Marcus, Maya, and Miles?" Marcus's breath caught. Someone knew their names. Someone cared enough to take the call immediately. Are they safe?" the woman continued. "Please, if you know anything." "They're alive," Marcus said carefully. "But they need to know something first. If you found them, would you keep them together?" "Of course," the woman said without hesitation. "They're family. Family stays together. That's non-negotiable. Even if it's harder, even if it costs more. Son," the woman's voice was gentle but firm. "Those children are my great-nieces and great-nephew. They're the last piece of my father's legacy. Money is not an issue. Keeping them together is the only issue." Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in months: hope. "They've been taking care of themselves," he said. "They're smart and strong, and they look out for each other." "I'm sure they are," Rebecca said. "They come from a long line of survivors. But children shouldn't have to survive alone. They should be allowed to just be children. What if?" Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. "What if someone else has been helping them? Someone who doesn't have much, but shared what they had anyway. Then that someone is a hero," Rebecca said immediately. "And heroes deserve to be recognized and rewarded." Marcus hung up the phone with his heart racing. For the first time since their parents died, he began to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was a way for their story to have a happy ending. But that happy ending would have to wait. First, they had more important work to do. Over the next several weeks, the triplets implemented their most elaborate plan yet. They began creating situations that would test not just Keisha's kindness, but her character under extreme pressure. They arranged for Miles to accidentally get hurt near Ruby's diner one evening, scraping his knee badly enough to need attention, but not seriously enough to require a hospital. As they'd predicted, Keisha immediately brought him inside, cleaned his wound, and fussed over him like he was her own child. "Where are your siblings?" she asked, and when Miles claimed they were around somewhere, she insisted on walking him to find them. They staged Maya getting lost near the medical office where Keisha worked her day job, timing it so Keisha would find her crying on her lunch break. Without question, Keisha spent her entire 30-minute break helping Maya look for her brothers, even though it meant she couldn't eat the small lunch she'd packed. Most telling of all, they created a scenario where Marcus appeared to be sick. Not seriously, but enough to concern anyone who cared about children's welfare. When Keisha found him shivering behind the diner, claiming he felt funny, she immediately took his temperature with a thermometer from her purse. "You have a fever, baby," she said, and without hesitation, she called in sick to her evening shift, losing money she desperately needed to take care of a child who wasn't even hers. She brought him to Jerry's apartment, made him soup, and sat beside him for hours, monitoring his condition and telling him stories about her own childhood to keep him calm. When his fever miraculously broke the next morning, she didn't question the quick recovery. She just made him breakfast and walked him to where his siblings were waiting. Each test revealed the same truth. Keisha Williams was exactly who she appeared to be. Her kindness wasn't conditional on her circumstances, her resources, or even logic. It was simply part of her core being, as natural and necessary as breathing. The triplets began to understand that they hadn't just been fed by a nice lady who felt sorry for them. They had been loved by someone who possessed a rare and precious gift: the ability to see the inherent worth in every human being and act on that recognition without calculation or expectation of return. As March arrived with its promise of spring, Marcus, Maya, and Miles Henderson made a decision that would change not just their lives, but Keisha's life forever. It was time to go home. Time to claim their heritage and use the power that came with their family name for something their great-grandfather would have been proud of, rewarding genuine kindness and ensuring that heroes like Keisha Williams were never forgotten. But first, they needed to say goodbye to the woman who had saved them in every way a person could be saved. They needed to let her know that her kindness had mattered more than she could possibly imagine. They just had no idea that their goodbye would actually be the beginning of a 20-year journey that would culminate in helicopter blades and answered prayers, and the kind of reward that only comes to those who love without counting the cost. The photograph was faded and creased from years of being carried in Keisha's wallet, but the image was still clear. A young black woman in a nurse's uniform standing next to a tall man in a suit outside what appeared to be a hospital. The woman's smile was radiant, proud, and her hand rested protectively on the shoulder of a 7-year-old girl, Keisha herself. "That's my mama," Keisha told Jasmine one evening as they sat in Jerry's small living room, sorting through the few personal belongings they'd managed to salvage from their eviction. Lorraine Williams. She was the finest nurse Grady Hospital ever had. Jasmine studied the photograph with the intensity only children could muster. "Who's the man with her?" "That's Dr. James Henderson," Keisha said, her voice carrying a reverence that made Jasmine look up. He was somebody important. Someone who believed that everybody deserved good medical care, no matter what color they were or how much money they had. What Keisha didn't tell her 8-year-old daughter was the full story. How her mother had been one of the first black nurses hired at Grady's cardiac unit in 1985, how she'd faced harassment and discrimination that would have broken a lesser person, and how Dr. James Henderson had not only defended her, but promoted her to head nurse within 2 years. "Your mama's got hands that heal and a heart that understands," Dr. Henderson had told Keisha once when she was 12, visiting the hospital after school. "That's a rare combination. You remember that when you're grown, healing isn't just about medicine. It's about seeing people's humanity and responding to it." Dr. Henderson had died when Keisha was 15, but not before establishing a foundation that would provide scholarships for underprivileged students and funding for community health programs. More importantly, he'd left an impression on young Keisha about what it meant to use whatever power you had in service of others. "Mama," Jasmine said, interrupting Keisha's memories, "why do you keep that picture?" "Because," Keisha said, carefully placing the photograph back in her wallet, "it reminds me that good people change the world one person at a time. Dr. Henderson changed our lives by giving my mama a chance when nobody else would. And my mama changed other people's lives by being the kind of nurse who saw patients as family. Is that why you help people even when we don't have money?" Keisha pulled her daughter close. "That's exactly why, baby. Because kindness isn't about having enough. It's about understanding that we're all connected, and when we take care of each other, somehow everything works out the way it's supposed to." 15 miles away, in the abandoned community center that had become their temporary home, the Henderson triplets were having their own conversation about legacy and family. Marcus had managed to find an old newspaper in a dumpster behind the public library, a feature article from 1995 about prominent Atlanta families and their contributions to the civil rights movement. The headline read, "Henderson Legacy Lives On. Foundation continues civil rights leaders' work." "Listen to this," Marcus read aloud to his siblings by the light of a small flashlight they'd found. "Dr. James Henderson, who died in 1990, was instrumental in desegregating Atlanta's hospital system and ensuring equal medical care for all residents regardless of race or economic status. His daughter, Rebecca Henderson, now runs the Henderson Foundation, which has provided over $50 million in scholarships and community programs." Maya looked up from the can of soup she was sharing with Miles. "That's really our great-grandpa?" "According to what the social worker said," Marcus confirmed. "And look at this picture." He held up the newspaper so they could see the grainy black and white photograph of a tall, distinguished man in a white coat standing next to a group of nurses. Even in the poor-quality image, the family resemblance was unmistakable. The same determined jawline Marcus possessed, the same intelligent eyes that looked out from Maya's face. "He looks like us," Miles said quietly. "He was fighting for people like Miss Keisha's mama," Marcus continued reading. "Dr. Henderson was known for his mentorship of young medical professionals, particularly nurses and doctors from underrepresented communities. He believed that healthcare was a human right, not a privilege. The triplets sat in contemplative silence, processing this information. They'd been living as forgotten children, scrounging for survival, completely unaware that they carried the legacy of a man who had dedicated his life to helping others. "No wonder Miss Keisha felt familiar," Maya said suddenly. "What do you mean?" Miles asked. "I mean, maybe it's not a coincidence that she helped us. Maybe people like her and people like our great-grandpa are supposed to find each other." Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold February air seeping through the broken windows. "Maya, what if Miss Keisha's mama worked with our great-grandpa?" It seemed impossible, but the more they thought about it, the more it made sense. Atlanta's black professional community in the 1980s had been relatively small. If their great-grandfather had been mentoring nurses, and if Keisha's mother had been a pioneering black nurse at Grady Hospital. "We need to find out," Marcus said with sudden urgency. The next day, while Keisha was at her day job, the triplets made their way to the main branch of the Atlanta Public Library. Using skills they'd learned from months of survival, how to look invisible, how to avoid questions from adults, they accessed the public computers and began researching. What they discovered changed everything. In the archives of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, they found a photograph from 1987. Grady Hospital's cardiac unit receives commendation. There, standing in the front row of healthcare workers being honored, was a woman whose face they now knew from Keisha's wallet, Lorraine Williams. And standing directly behind her, his hand on her shoulder in a gesture of obvious pride and support, was Dr. James Henderson. The caption read, "Head Nurse Lorraine Williams receives recognition for outstanding patient care." Dr. James Henderson, Chief of Cardiology and Civil Rights Advocate, praised Williams as an example of the healing power of compassion in action. But there was more. In a follow-up article from 1990, they found Dr. Henderson's obituary, which included a quote from Lorraine Williams. "Dr. Henderson didn't just give me a job, he gave me a chance to prove that excellence has no color. He taught me that healing happens when we see patients as family, not cases. I will carry his lessons with me always and pass them on to my daughter." Miles stared at the screen, his young mind trying to process the implications. Miss Keisha's mama learned from our great-grandpa. And now Miss Keisha is taking care of us. It's like, Maya struggled to find the words. Like the circle is completing itself. Marcus felt something shift inside his chest, not just understanding, but purpose. We're not just three random kids she helped. We're connected to her family's story. Her mama was part of our great-grandpa's legacy, and now she's part of ours, Maya finished. That evening, they watched from their usual hiding spots as Keisha finished her shift at Ruby's Diner. But instead of following her routine, she made an unexpected stop at Grady Hospital. The triplets, curious and concerned, followed at a distance. They watched through the lobby windows as Keisha met with a doctor, as she sat in a waiting room looking worried, as she finally made her way to the pediatric intensive care unit. After an hour, she emerged looking relieved but exhausted. On her way out, Keisha stopped at a memorial wall in the hospital lobby, a tribute to healthcare workers who had made significant contributions to the community. She stood for a long moment in front of a particular plaque, and the triplets could see her lips moving as if she were having a conversation. When she left, Marcus crept close enough to read what had held her attention. Dr. James Henderson, 1945 to 1990, and the nurses who carried forward his vision of compassionate care. Healing happens when we see patients as family, not cases. Below the plaque was a smaller inscription. In memory of Lorraine Williams, RN 1955 to 2018, who embodied Dr. Henderson's teachings and passed them on to the next generation. Marcus felt tears he didn't expect. Keisha's mother was gone, had been gone for less than 2 years. No wonder Keisha seemed to carry such a weight of responsibility, such a drive to help others, even when she could barely help herself. She was carrying forward not just her mother's legacy, but the legacy of the man who had been her mother's mentor. The man who was also their great-grandfather. As the triplets made their way back to their shelter that night, they carried with them a new understanding of their situation. This wasn't just about 3 homeless children being helped by a kind waitress. This was about the continuation of a legacy that had been building for decades, a legacy of people who believed that healing happened through seeing others as family. "She doesn't know," Maya said as they settled in for the night. Know what? Miles asked. She doesn't know that we're family. Not blood family, but legacy family. She doesn't know that helping us is like finishing something her mama started. Marcus nodded slowly. And she doesn't know that we can help her finish it too. The next morning brought unexpected visitors to their abandoned community center. 2 social workers and a police officer had somehow tracked their general location and were conducting a systematic search of the area. Time to go, Marcus whispered urgently, and the 3 children gathered their few possessions and slipped out through a broken window in the back of the building. But as they made their escape, Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. Instead of running to another hiding place, he led his siblings toward the one place he knew they would be safe, the one person who had never asked questions or demanded explanations or threatened to separate them. They were going to Keisha Williams, not as test subjects or objects of study, but as family returning to family. They were going home to the woman who carried their great-grandfather's legacy in her heart, even though she didn't know that the children she'd been protecting carried it in their blood. And for the first time since their parents had died, Marcus Henderson felt something he'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope that they might actually have found where they belonged. When Keisha opened Jerry's apartment door at 6:30 a.m. to find 3 shivering children on the other side, her first instinct wasn't to ask questions. It was to pull them inside where it was warm. "What happened?" she asked, immediately noticing the fear in their eyes, the way they kept glancing back toward the stairwell as if expecting to be followed. "Miss Keisha," Marcus said, his 8-year-old voice trying to sound braver than he felt. "We need help. There are people looking for us, and we don't know if they're good people or bad people." Keisha knelt down to their eye level, her heart already knowing what her mind was still processing. "Are you in danger?" "Maybe," Maya whispered. "We saw police cars and people with clipboards asking questions about us." "We didn't do anything wrong," Miles added quickly. We don't want to be separated." Keisha looked at their faces, exhausted, frightened, but still trusting enough to come to her. Behind her, she could hear Jerry getting ready for his early shift at the diner, and Jasmine was still sleeping on the pull-out couch that had become their temporary home. "Okay," she said simply. "You're safe here. Let me think about this." What followed was a conversation that changed the trajectory of 4 lives forever. "Jerry," Keisha called softly, and when he emerged from the bathroom, she quickly explained the situation. To his credit, Jerry didn't hesitate. "They can stay as long as they need to," he said. "But Keisha, if they're really in the system, if people are looking for them." "I know," Keisha said. "But I also know these children. They're not runaways because they're bad kids. They're runaways because they're scared of being split up." She turned back to the triplets. "I need you to be honest with me about something. Do you have family? Real family who might be looking for you?" The children exchanged glances, and Marcus made a decision that surprised even him. "Maybe," he said carefully. "But we don't know if they really want us, or if they just feel like they have to want us." Keisha understood completely. "And you're scared that even if they do want you, they might not understand that you 3 belong together." "Exactly," Maya said, relief evident in her voice at being understood. "Well then," Keisha said, standing up, "we're going to figure this out together. But first, you're going to have breakfast, and then you're going to get some real sleep." Over the next several weeks, an unusual family unit formed in Jerry's small apartment. Jasmine was thrilled to have other children around, treating the triplets like the siblings she'd always wanted. Jerry grumbled about the noise and the crowded quarters, but Keisha noticed him buying extra groceries without being asked and making sure there were enough blankets for everyone. And Keisha discovered something unexpected. Despite the chaos, despite the uncertainty, despite the very real possibility that she was harboring children who were being actively searched for by authorities, she felt more complete than she had in years. "Mama," Jasmine said one evening as they all worked together to prepare dinner in Jerry's tiny kitchen, "is this what having a big family feels like?" Keisha watched as Marcus helped Miles reach something on a high shelf, while Maya carefully set the table with mismatched plates and cups. "I think it is, baby." The triplets, meanwhile, were experiencing something they'd almost forgotten, the feeling of being children instead of survivors. For the first time in months, they could sleep without taking turns keeping watch. They could eat meals without wondering where the next one would come from. They could play games and tell jokes and argue about silly things the way siblings were supposed to. But more than that, they were learning about Keisha in ways their careful observation had never revealed. They learned that she sang while she cooked, old gospel songs her mother had taught her, hummed quietly so as not to wake anyone who might still be sleeping. They learned that she kept a small notebook where she wrote down things she was grateful for each day, even on the hardest days. Found a quarter in the couch cushions, read one entry. Jasmine laughed at my terrible joke, read another. The kids are safe and warm tonight, appeared frequently. They learned that she called her cousin at the hospital every evening to check on the little boy who'd needed surgery, and that she'd been sending $5 a week to help with his medical bills. $5 she took from her own grocery money without complaint. Most importantly, they learned that her kindness wasn't something she turned on and off depending on circumstances. It was simply who she was, as natural and consistent as breathing. One evening, about 3 weeks into their stay, Marcus found Keisha sitting alone on Jerry's small balcony, looking out at the city lights. She'd been quieter than usual that day, and Marcus had noticed her checking her phone more often. "Miss Keisha," he said softly. "Are you okay?" She looked up, surprised. She'd thought all the children were asleep. "I'm fine, baby. Just thinking." Marcus sat down beside her on the plastic chair Jerry had salvaged from somewhere. "About us. About a lot of things," Keisha said honestly. "But yes, about you too. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to tell me the truth." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "Okay. Are you happy here? I mean really happy? Or are you just pretending because you don't have anywhere else to go?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He'd been expecting her to ask about their family, about their past, about whether they were in trouble. He hadn't expected her to ask about his feelings. "I'm really happy," he said, and realized it was completely true. "Miss Keisha, this is the safest I've felt since before." "Before your parents died?" Marcus nodded, surprised she'd figured it out. They'd never explicitly told her about their parents. "I thought so," Keisha said gently. "You take care of your sisters the way someone who's used to being the grown-up takes care of people. That's a heavy responsibility for someone your age." "But I want to take care of them," Marcus said quickly. "They're my family. I know you do. And they're lucky to have you." Keisha was quiet for a moment. "Marcus, can I tell you something?" He nodded. "When I was about your age, my daddy left. Just packed up one day and never came back. My mama tried to be strong, tried to take care of everything by herself. But it was hard, really hard. I used to lie awake at night worrying that something would happen to her, that I'd end up alone." Marcus felt a chill of recognition. "What happened?" "We got help," Keisha said simply. "Not from the government or from some program, but from people. Mrs. Patterson at church, Dr. Henderson at the hospital where my mama worked. Neighbors who maybe didn't have much more than we did, but shared what they had anyway." "Did it make you feel weak, having to accept help?" "At first," Keisha admitted. "But then I realized something important. Accepting help isn't about being weak. It's about being smart enough to know when you need support and brave enough to let people love you." Marcus thought about this. "Is that what you're doing for us? Loving us?" "Yes," Keisha said without hesitation. "That's exactly what I'm doing. Even though we're not really your kids?" Keisha turned to look at him directly. "Marcus, family isn't just about blood. Family is about people who choose to take care of each other, who choose to stay when things get hard, who choose to love even when it's not convenient or easy." Marcus felt something break open in his chest, not painful, but like a door opening after being locked for a long time. "Miss Keisha." "Yes, baby. I love you too." It was the first time he'd said those words to anyone since his parents died. The first time he'd allowed himself to feel that vulnerable, that open, that trusting. Keisha reached over and hugged him, and Marcus realized that this was what he'd been searching for all along. Not just shelter or food or safety, but the feeling of belonging somewhere, of mattering to someone, of being part of something bigger than survival. Inside the apartment, Maya and Miles were having their own moment of connection with Jasmine. The 3 children were lying on the pull-out couch, whispering in the dark the way children do when they're supposed to be sleeping. "Do you think your mama will let us stay forever?" Maya asked. "I hope so," Jasmine said. "It's more fun with you here. And Mama seems happier." "Happier how?" Miles asked. "She sings more," Jasmine said thoughtfully. "And she smiles even when she thinks nobody's looking. Before you came, she only smiled when she was trying to make me feel better about something." Maya and Miles exchanged glances in the darkness. They'd been so focused on what Keisha was giving them that they hadn't fully considered what they might be giving her in return. "Jasmine," Maya said quietly, "what happened to your daddy?" "Don't know," Jasmine replied matter-of-factly. "Mama says he wasn't ready to be a daddy, so he went away before I was born. But she says it's okay because we take care of each other. Don't you get sad about not having a daddy? Miles asked. Sometimes, Jasmine admitted. But Mama says families come in all different shapes. She says what matters isn't who's missing, but who's there. Miles thought about this. In the months since their parents died, he'd been so focused on what they'd lost that he'd forgotten to notice what they'd found. They'd found each other, really found each other in ways that went beyond just sharing DNA. They'd found Jerry, with his gruff kindness and steady presence. They'd found a sense of belonging in the most unlikely place. And they'd found Keisha, who was teaching them that love wasn't something you earned or deserved, but something you chose to give and receive. Over the following days, the connection between Keisha and the triplets deepened in small but significant ways. Marcus began helping her with Jasmine's homework, revealing an intelligence and patience that reminded Keisha powerfully of her mother. Maya started helping with cooking, displaying an intuitive understanding of flavors and ingredients that made even Jerry take notice. Miles, the quietest of the three, began drawing pictures, detailed beautiful sketches of their makeshift family that Keisha carefully saved in her notebook. "You're really talented," she told him one evening, looking at a drawing he'd made of all 6 of them crowded around Jerry's small kitchen table. "My mama used to draw," Miles said shyly. "She said drawing was like taking pictures with your heart." "That's beautiful," Keisha said. "And true. This picture shows exactly how this feels, like family." But even as they grew closer, the reality of their situation loomed large. Keisha knew that she couldn't keep 3 children indefinitely without legal custody. She knew that somewhere people were looking for them, worried about them, possibly desperate to bring them home. And the triplets knew that eventually they would have to make a choice: trust their real family with the truth, or live in hiding forever. What none of them knew was that 20 years later, that choice would lead to a helicopter landing in front of a modest house in Atlanta, carrying 3 successful adults who had never forgotten the woman who taught them that family was about choosing to love, even when it wasn't convenient or easy. The seeds of that future were already planted in Jerry's crowded apartment, in the quiet moments of connection, in the growing understanding that love, real love, never demands anything in return but grows stronger when it's shared. The phone call came at 2:17 a.m. on a Thursday in late March, jolting Keisha from the first deep sleep she'd managed in weeks. Jerry's apartment had grown crowded with 6 people sharing space meant for one, but they'd all found a rhythm that worked, until the voice on the other end of the line shattered their fragile stability. "Miss Williams." The voice was professional but strained. "This is Dr. Rodriguez from Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. I'm calling about your daughter, Jasmine." Keisha's blood turned to ice. "What's wrong? Where is she?" "She collapsed at school this afternoon and was brought in by ambulance. Her teacher said she'd been complaining of stomach pain and dizziness for several days. We've run some tests, and we need you to come in immediately." Keisha was already reaching for her clothes, her hands shaking as she tried to process the words. Stomach pain, dizziness, tests. Jasmine had mentioned not feeling well, but Keisha had attributed it to the stress of their living situation, the disruption to their normal routine. "I'll be right there," she managed. "Miss Williams," Dr. Rodriguez's voice was gentle but urgent, "you should know that we'll need to discuss treatment options and financial arrangements. Do you have insurance?" The question hit like a physical blow. Keisha's insurance through the medical office was basic at best, with a deductible so high it might as well not exist. And with the hours she'd been missing to care for the triplets, she wasn't even sure if her coverage was still active. "I'll figure it out," she said, hanging up before her voice could break completely. Marcus, who had been sleeping lightly as always, sat up on the air mattress they'd arranged on Jerry's living room floor. "Miss Keisha? What's wrong?" "Jasmine's in the hospital," Keisha said, pulling on her jacket with movements that seemed disconnected from conscious thought. "I have to go." "We'll come with you," Maya said, immediately alert. "No babies. You stay here with Jerry. I'll call as soon as I know something." But as Keisha drove through the empty Atlanta streets toward the hospital, her mind wasn't just on Jasmine. It was on the impossible mathematics of her life. How she was going to pay for whatever treatment her daughter needed when she was already 3 months behind on debt payments to this same hospital for her cousin's son. At Children's Healthcare, Dr. Rodriguez delivered news that confirmed Keisha's worst fears. Jasmine had acute appendicitis, complicated by what appeared to be a partial obstruction. She needed surgery, and she needed it within the next few hours. The good news is that we caught it before rupture, Dr. Rodriguez explained as they sat in a small consultation room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. With prompt treatment, children recover completely from this type of surgery. How much? Keisha asked quietly. The surgery itself, plus the hospital stay, recovery, follow-up care. You're looking at approximately $15,000. Your insurance will cover some of it, but Keisha closed her eyes. Even if her insurance covered half, which was optimistic, she was looking at more money than she made in 6 months. Doctor, she said, opening her eyes and looking directly at him, if I can't pay up front, will you still do the surgery? Of course, Dr. Rodriguez said immediately. We don't let children suffer because of financial issues. But I want you to understand the financial commitment you're taking on. I understand, Keisha said. Do whatever you need to do to make my daughter well. The surgery took 4 hours. Keisha spent that time in the family waiting room, making phone calls she didn't want to make and facing realities she'd been avoiding. The first call was to her supervisor at the medical office. I know I've been unreliable lately, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. But my daughter is in surgery, and I need to be here. Keisha, her supervisor's voice was sympathetic but firm. I've been patient with your absences, but we've had to cover your shifts too many times. I'm sorry about your daughter, but I have to let you go. The second call was to Jerry. How is she? He asked immediately. She's in surgery. It's going to be okay, but Jerry. Keisha's voice finally broke. I just lost my day job, and the hospital bill is going to be more than I make in half a year. Jerry was quiet for a moment. We'll figure it out, he said finally. Focus on Jasmine right now. The third call was the hardest, to her landlord about the storage unit where she'd been keeping their belongings since the eviction. Mrs. Williams, his voice was apologetic but businesslike. I've been patient, but you're 4 months behind on the storage fees. I have to auction the contents next week, unless you can bring the account current. Keisha hung up and sat in the plastic hospital chair, staring at her hands. In the space of 6 hours, she'd lost her day job, taken on crushing medical debt, and was about to lose the last physical reminders of the life she'd built for herself and Jasmine. But when Dr. Rodriguez emerged from surgery with news that the operation had gone perfectly, when she was allowed to see Jasmine's sleepy but smiling face in recovery, Keisha felt something she hadn't expected, gratitude. Mama, Jasmine whispered. I was scared. I know, baby, Keisha said, stroking her daughter's hair. But you're okay now. You're going to be fine. Are you scared too? Keisha looked at her daughter, pale and small in the hospital bed, but alive and safe and going to be healthy, and realized that fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. No, she said truthfully. I'm not scared. We're going to figure everything out, one step at a time. When Keisha finally returned to Jerry's apartment 2 days later, bringing Jasmine home to recover, she found the triplets waiting with anxious faces and a small pile of crumpled bills and coins on the kitchen table. What's this? She asked. It's for Jasmine, Marcus said proudly. We collected cans and bottles and did some work for people. It's not much, $37, but we wanted to help. Keisha stared at the money, understanding flooding through her. These children, who had nothing, who were living day to day on charity and kindness, had spent their time earning money to help her daughter. You didn't have to do this, she said softly. Yes, we did, Maya said firmly. That's what family does. That night, after everyone else was asleep, Keisha sat at Jerry's kitchen table with a notebook, trying to make sense of numbers that refused to add up. Even working double shifts at Ruby's diner. If Jerry could give her extra hours, she'd be looking at years of debt payments. The storage unit was a loss. She'd have to let their belongings go. And she still had no solution for permanent housing. She was so absorbed in her calculations that she didn't notice Marcus padding quietly into the kitchen until he spoke. Miss Keisha, can I ask you something? She looked up, surprised. Of course, baby. Can't sleep. I keep thinking about what you said about accepting help, Marcus said, sitting in the chair across from her. About how it's not about being weak, but about being smart and brave. What about it? Marcus took a deep breath. What if there was a way for us to help you? Really help you. But it would mean taking a big risk. Keisha studied his face, seeing something there she hadn't noticed before, a maturity beyond his 8 years, a weight of knowledge that seemed too heavy for such small shoulders. What kind of risk? The kind where we might have to trust people we're not sure about, Marcus said carefully. The kind where we might have to go home. Keisha felt something shift in her understanding. Marcus, do you know who your family is? He nodded slowly. We found out a few weeks ago. We have people looking for us. People who might be able to help you the way you helped us. Why didn't you tell me? Because we were scared they'd split us up. And because Marcus's voice grew small. Because we were scared they wouldn't understand why we chose to stay with you instead of coming to them right away. Keisha reached across the table and took his hand. Baby, I would never want you to stay in a bad situation because you felt like you owed me something. It's not about owing you, Marcus said urgently. It's about loving you. You're our family too now. And families take care of each other. Looking at this 8-year-old boy, seeing the determination in his eyes, the way he was willing to risk everything to help her, Keisha understood something profound about the ripple effects of kindness. She'd fed 3 hungry children on a cold night, not because she could afford to, but because it was right. And now, months later, those same children were willing to face their deepest fears to help her in return. What would we need to do? She asked quietly. We need to call our family, Marcus said. We need to tell them where we are and ask them to help you. Not as payment for taking care of us, but because that's what good people do. They help other good people. And if they say no, if they decide I'm not worthy of help, Marcus's 8-year-old voice carried absolute certainty. Then they're not really our family, and we'll figure out something else. As Keisha looked at this child who was offering to risk everything for her sake, she realized that she was witnessing something extraordinary. Not just kindness returned, but kindness multiplied. The love she'd shown these children was coming back to her transformed, bigger, stronger, more purposeful than what she'd originally given. In 12 hours, she would learn that Marcus, Maya, and Miles Henderson were the great-grandchildren of the doctor who had mentored her mother. She would discover that their family had been searching desperately for them, and that their disappearance had left a hole in hearts she didn't even know were connected to hers. But tonight, all she knew was that 3 children who had every reason to think only of themselves were instead thinking of her. 3 children who had learned about love from her example were now teaching her something about the power of chosen family, about the way kindness creates bonds that go deeper than blood, stronger than circumstance. Tomorrow would bring phone calls and revelations and the beginning of changes she couldn't imagine. But tonight, in Jerry's small kitchen, surrounded by the quiet breathing of children who trusted her enough to call her family, Keisha Williams learned something she would carry for the next 20 years. Love, real love, doesn't diminish when you give it away. It multiplies. It grows. It becomes something bigger and more beautiful than you ever imagined possible. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it comes home to you with helicopter blades and answered prayers and the kind of reward that only comes to those who love without counting the cost. The phone call that would change everything happened at 8:47 a.m. on a Friday morning, while Keisha was helping Jasmine with her physical therapy exercises in Jerry's living room. Marcus had been sitting quietly at the kitchen table for an hour, staring at a piece of paper with a phone number written on it, gathering courage for what he knew he had to do. Are you sure about this? Maya whispered, sitting beside him. No, Marcus admitted. But Miss Keisha needs help, and we're the only ones who can get it for her. Miles nodded solemnly from across the table. Great-grandpa would have helped her. That's what the newspaper article said. He helped people who helped others. Marcus picked up Jerry's cordless phone with hands that trembled slightly. He'd practiced what he would say, but now that the moment was here, all his prepared words seemed inadequate. He dialed the number for the Henderson Foundation. Henderson Foundation, this is Patricia speaking. I need to speak to Rebecca Henderson, Marcus said, his 8-year-old voice carefully controlled. It's about her missing great-nieces and great-nephew. Please hold, Patricia said immediately, and Marcus could hear the urgency in her voice. Within seconds, another voice came on the line, warm, desperate, hopeful. This is Rebecca Henderson. Are you calling about Marcus, Maya, and Miles? Yes, ma'am, Marcus said, his voice growing smaller despite his efforts to sound grown-up. This is Marcus. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Marcus wondered if the call had been disconnected. Then he heard something that made his own eyes fill with tears, the sound of someone crying with relief. Marcus. Rebecca's voice was thick with emotion. Oh, sweet boy, where are you? Are you safe? Are your sisters with you? We're safe, Marcus said quickly. Maya and Miles are here. We're all together. Thank God, Rebecca whispered. Marcus, we've been looking for you for almost a year. The whole family has been worried sick. Where have you been? Who's been taking care of you? Marcus took a deep breath. This was the moment that would determine everything. Miss Rebecca, he said, before I tell you where we are, I need to ask you something important. There's a lady who's been taking care of us. She saved our lives, and now she needs help. If we come home, will you help her too? Of course, Rebecca said without hesitation. Anyone who's been caring for you three is family as far as I'm concerned. What kind of help does she need? And so Marcus began to tell the story. How they'd been living on the streets, how Keisha had found them behind Ruby's diner, how she'd fed them and given them her coat and brought them into her home even though she could barely afford to take care of her own daughter. She lost her job because of us, Marcus explained, his voice growing more urgent. And her little girl had to have surgery, and now she owes the hospital thousands of dollars. She's about to lose everything, Miss Rebecca, and it's because she chose to take care of us instead of taking care of herself. Rebecca was quiet for a moment, processing this information. Marcus, what's this woman's full name? Keisha Williams. She's a waitress at Ruby's diner, and she used to work at a doctor's office before she lost that job. Another silence, longer this time. Marcus. Rebecca's voice had changed, becoming something deeper, more wondering. What was Keisha's mother's name? Lorraine Williams. She was a nurse at Grady Hospital. She died a couple years ago. Oh my God, Rebecca breathed. Marcus, do you understand what this means? No, ma'am. Your great-grandfather, my father, Dr. James Henderson. He mentored your Miss Keisha's mother. Lorraine Williams was one of his favorite nurses. He used to talk about her all the time, about how she embodied everything he believed about healing and compassion. Marcus felt something electric run through his body. So Miss Keisha and us, we were already connected? More than connected, sweetheart. Your great-grandfather would have said this was destiny. The daughter of the woman he mentored ends up saving his great-grandchildren? That's not coincidence, Marcus. That's the universe completing a circle. From the living room, Keisha looked up from Jasmine's exercises, noticing Marcus on the phone, but not wanting to interrupt what seemed like an important conversation. Miss Rebecca, Marcus continued, there's something else you need to know. Miss Keisha doesn't know who we really are. She doesn't know about our family or about her mama working with great-grandpa. She just helped us because we needed help. That makes it even more remarkable, Rebecca said softly. Marcus, I need you to put Miss Keisha on the phone. I want to talk to the woman who saved my babies. Marcus felt his chest tighten with hope and fear. You're not mad that we didn't come to you right away? Sweetheart, Rebecca's voice was gentle but firm. You survived on your own for months, you kept your sisters safe, and you found someone who loved you enough to risk everything for your well-being. I'm not mad, I'm proud of you. And I'm grateful to Miss Keisha in ways I don't think I can ever fully express. Marcus hung up the phone and walked into the living room on shaking legs. Keisha looked up at him with concern. Marcus? Baby, you're white as a sheet. Who were you talking to? Miss Keisha, Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. I need to tell you something. About who we really are. 20 minutes later, Keisha sat in stunned silence as the triplets finished telling their story. They told her about their parents' death, about the foster system that had tried to separate them, about running away and living on the streets. They told her about discovering their connection to Dr. James Henderson, about learning that her mother had worked with their great-grandfather. Most importantly, they told her about the phone call with Rebecca Henderson, about their family's desperate search for them, about the reward being offered for their safe return. You're telling me, Keisha said slowly, that you three are the great-grandchildren of Dr. Henderson? The Dr. Henderson who worked with my mama. Yes, ma'am, Maya said quietly. And your family has been looking for you this whole time. Yes, ma'am, Miles added. And you didn't tell me because you were afraid I'd make you go back before you were ready? Marcus nodded. We were scared they'd split us up. And we were scared they wouldn't understand why we wanted to stay with you. Keisha looked at these three children who had trusted her with their lives, their secrets, their deepest fears. And now you've told them about me? About our situation. Miss Keisha, Marcus said urgently, they want to help you. Not because they feel like they have to, but because of what you did for us. Miss Rebecca said your mama was special to our great-grandpa, and now you're special to us. The phone rang again, making everyone jump. Jerry answered it from the kitchen. Keisha, he called, it's for you. Someone named Rebecca Henderson. Keisha's hands were shaking as she took the phone. Miss Williams. The voice was warm, cultured, but filled with emotion. This is Rebecca Henderson. I believe you've been taking care of my great-nieces and great-nephew. Yes, ma'am, Keisha said, her voice barely steady. First, I need to thank you, Rebecca continued. Marcus has told me what you've done for them, how you've kept them safe and loved them when they had no one else. There are no words adequate to express my gratitude. They're wonderful children, Keisha said. Anyone would have. No, Rebecca interrupted gently. Not anyone would have done what you did. You took 3 strange children into your home when you could barely afford to take care of your own daughter. You fed them when you were hungry yourself. You gave them love when you had every reason to focus on your own problems. Keisha felt tears starting to flow. I couldn't just leave them out there. Of course you couldn't, Rebecca said softly, because you're Lorraine Williams' daughter. My father talked about your mother all the time, Miss Williams. He said she was the finest nurse he ever worked with because she understood that healing wasn't just about medicine. It was about seeing people as family. You knew my mama? I knew of her. My father respected her more than almost anyone. He used to say that Lorraine Williams could teach doctors things about compassion that they'd never learn in medical school. Keisha was crying openly now. She would have loved to hear that. Miss Williams, may I call you Keisha? I understand you're facing some financial difficulties because of the care you've provided to my family. It's not about the money, Keisha said quickly. I didn't help them expecting anything in return. I know you didn't, Rebecca said. That's exactly why you deserve help. Keisha, I'd like to meet with you today if possible. I'd like to discuss how we can help you get back on your feet. And I'd like to bring the children home, all of them. All of them. If you and your daughter would be willing, we'd like to offer you a position with the Henderson Foundation. We need someone to run our new family services program, someone who understands what it means to care for children who have nowhere else to go. Keisha felt the room spinning around her. I don't understand. We want to offer you a job, Keisha. A good job with benefits and a salary that will let you take care of Jasmine without working 2 jobs. We want to pay off your medical bills and help you find a proper home. And we want Marcus, Maya, and Miles to be part of your family officially, if that's what they want. From across the room, Keisha could see the triplets holding hands, their eyes fixed on her face with desperate hope. Why? Keisha whispered. Because 25 years ago, my father took a chance on a young nurse named Lorraine Williams. He saw her character, her compassion, her dedication to healing others. That investment paid dividends for decades in the lives she touched and the care she provided. Rebecca's voice grew stronger, more certain. Now her daughter has taken a chance on 3 lost children and shown them the same compassion, the same dedication to healing that my father saw in their grandmother. This isn't charity, Keisha. This is recognizing excellence and investing in it. I need to think, Keisha said, overwhelmed. Of course. But Keisha, I'm driving down from Birmingham right now. I'll be there in 3 hours. Can we meet then? Yes, Keisha said. Yes, we can meet. After she hung up, Keisha sat in Jerry's small living room, surrounded by 6 people who had become her family, trying to process what had just happened. Mama, Jasmine said softly, are we going to be okay? Keisha looked at her daughter, at the triplets who were watching her with hope and love, at Jerry who had given them shelter when they had nowhere else to go. Yes, baby, she said, finally allowing herself to believe it. We're going to be more than okay. We're going to be home. Marcus crossed the room and hugged her fiercely. Miss Keisha, does this mean you'll really be our family forever? If that's what you want, Keisha said, hugging him back. That's what we want, Maya said, joining the hug. That's what we've always wanted, Miles added, completing their circle. In 3 hours, Rebecca Henderson would arrive with legal documents, financial arrangements, and plans that would transform all of their lives. But the real transformation had already happened, in the moment when 3 hungry children met a woman who saw them as family, and in the moment when that same woman learned that love, real love, always finds a way to come home. The seeds planted on a cold November night were finally ready to bloom. Rebecca Henderson arrived at Jerry's apartment at exactly 2:30 p.m., but she didn't come alone. With her was a man who introduced himself as David Chun, the Henderson Foundation's legal counsel, and a woman named Sarah Martinez, who ran the Foundation's Family Services program. But more importantly, she came carrying a cardboard box that would later prove to contain the most precious items in Keisha's world. Items she thought she'd lost forever when her storage unit was auctioned. Before we talk about anything else, Rebecca said, setting the box on Jerry's small kitchen table, I need to return these to you. Inside were photo albums, Jasmine's baby pictures, certificates from Keisha's mother's nursing career, and the small jewelry box that had belonged to Keisha's grandmother. Items that told the story of a family's love across generations. "How did you?" Keisha whispered, touching her mother's nursing school graduation photo. "We bought the contents of your storage unit this morning," Rebecca said simply. "Everything is being moved to a climate-controlled facility until you decide what you'd like to do with it." Keisha felt tears start again. "You didn't have to." "Yes, we did," Rebecca said firmly. "Family history matters. Legacy matters. And you, Keisha Williams, are part of our family's legacy now." What followed was a conversation that would reshape 5 lives forever. "The position we're offering," Sarah Martinez explained, "is Director of Community Outreach for the Henderson Foundation. Your job would be to identify families and individuals who are falling through the cracks, people who need help but don't know how to access it, or who don't qualify for traditional assistance programs." "Essentially," Rebecca added with a smile, "you'd be doing exactly what you've been doing your whole life, but with resources to actually solve problems instead of just providing temporary relief." David Chen spread legal documents across the table. "The salary is $85,000 per year, plus full health benefits for you and all your dependents. The foundation will also provide a housing allowance and assistance with Jasmine's medical bills." Keisha stared at the numbers, trying to process them. $85,000 was more than she'd made in the past 3 years combined. "There's more," Rebecca said gently. "If you accept the position, we'd like to begin formal adoption proceedings for Marcus, Maya, and Miles. They've made it clear that they consider you their mother, and we respect their choice." Marcus stepped forward from where the triplets had been listening quietly. "Miss Rebecca, does this mean we all get to stay together?" "All of us. All of you," Rebecca confirmed. "Keisha, Jasmine, you 3, and even Jerry if he wants to be part of this family." Jerry, who had been uncharacteristically quiet during the entire conversation, cleared his throat. "Well," he said gruffly, "somebody's got to keep an eye on all these kids." The legal proceedings took 6 weeks to complete, but the transformation began immediately. The Henderson Foundation arranged for temporary housing in a furnished 3-bedroom apartment in a safe neighborhood while they house hunted. Jasmine's medical bills disappeared overnight. Keisha's debts were cleared, and she found herself with a savings account for the first time in her adult life. But more than the financial changes, it was the emotional transformation that mattered most. For the first time since her mother's death, Keisha felt like she could breathe. She could make decisions based on what was best for her family, not just what they could afford. She could say yes when Jasmine asked for art supplies, when Marcus wanted books, when Maya expressed interest in cooking classes, when Miles asked for better drawing materials. Most importantly, she could model something she'd never been able to show them before. That sometimes, if you're very lucky and very good, life rewards kindness with abundance. The house they eventually chose was a modest 4-bedroom in a tree-lined neighborhood with good schools. It had a large kitchen where the whole family could cook together, a backyard where Jerry could teach the kids to garden, and a front porch where Keisha could sit in the evenings and watch her children play. On the day they moved in, Keisha found Marcus standing in the living room, staring at the family photos Rebecca had helped her arrange on the mantelpiece. "Miss Keisha," he said softly, "do you think our great-grandpa would be proud of us?" "I think," Keisha said, putting her arm around his shoulders, "he'd be amazed at how his legacy lived on through 3 brave children and 1 stubborn waitress who couldn't leave well enough alone." Marcus grinned. "You're not a waitress anymore." "No," Keisha agreed, "but I'm still stubborn." Years passed. The Henderson children, as they came to be known in their neighborhood, grew from frightened survivors into confident, compassionate young adults. Marcus developed a passion for business and social justice. Maya discovered a talent for medicine that reminded everyone of her great-grandfather. Miles became an artist whose work captured the beauty he found in everyday moments of human kindness. Jasmine thrived as the baby sister to 3 fiercely protective older siblings, growing up secure in the knowledge that she was loved by a family that had chosen each other deliberately and completely. And Keisha discovered that her new role at the Henderson Foundation was more than a job, it was a calling. She developed programs that helped single mothers access childcare, that provided emergency assistance to families facing medical crises, that created pathways for children aging out of foster care to find stable housing and employment. But she never forgot where she came from, or the lesson her mother had taught her about taking care of people. Every month, she returned to Ruby's Diner, now under new management but still serving the same community, and she brought care packages for the staff. Every winter, she organized coat drives for homeless children. Every holiday, the Henderson Foundation sponsored meals for families who couldn't afford them. Why is it important to keep doing this? Maya asked one Thanksgiving as they served dinner at a community center downtown. She was 16 now, already talking about following in her great-grandfather's footsteps to medical school. Because, Keisha said, watching Maya hand a plate to an elderly man who reminded her of the homeless man she'd given her scarf to all those years ago. We never know which act of kindness is going to change everything for someone. Every person deserves to matter to somebody. Jerry, now officially Grandpa Jerry, to all 4 children, nodded approvingly. Your mama's right. Kindness is like planting seeds. You might not see the harvest right away, but it always grows into something beautiful. Miles, now 14 and carrying a sketchbook everywhere, looked up from drawing the scene around them. Is that why you helped us? Because you were planting seeds. No, baby, Keisha said, ruffling his hair. I helped you because you needed help. The seeds were just a bonus. 20 years later, Dr. Maya Henderson finished her morning rounds at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta and checked her phone to find a text from her brother Marcus. Everything's ready. The helicopter will pick us up at 2 p.m. She smiled, thinking about the surprise they'd been planning for months. Marcus, now a successful social entrepreneur who ran a nonprofit focused on housing issues, had finally tracked down the exact location of Keisha's current home. Miles, whose art now hung in galleries across the country, had designed the surprise down to the last detail. It had taken them 2 decades, but they were finally ready to properly repay the debt they owed to the woman who had saved their lives with scrambled eggs and unconditional love. At 2:47 p.m., Keisha Williams Henderson was in her garden, teaching her newest granddaughter, Jasmine's 3-year-old daughter, how to plant tomatoes when the sound of helicopter blades filled the air above their quiet neighborhood. Grandma Keisha, little Emma said, pointing at the sky. Why is that loud bird landing in our yard? Keisha looked up, shielding her eyes from the sun, and watched as a gleaming helicopter settled gently onto the large lawn behind their house. 3 figures emerged from the aircraft, and even from a distance, even after 20 years, she recognized the walk, the gestures, the way they moved as one unit. Her children, her first children, coming home. Marcus reached her first, now a tall, distinguished man in his late 20s, but his smile was exactly the same as it had been when he was 8 years old and desperate to take care of his sisters. Miss Keisha, he said, using the name he'd never stopped calling her, we have something for you. Maya was next, elegant in her doctor's coat, carrying a large envelope. We've been working on this for months, she said, hugging the woman who had taught her that healing happened through love as much as medicine. Miles, quieter but no less emotional, carried a wrapped canvas. We wanted to show you what your kindness grew into, he said simply. The envelope Maya handed her contained documents that took Keisha several minutes to understand. A deed to a community center built in her honor. Scholarship funds established in her mother's name. A foundation created to continue the work she'd started. Helping families who fell through the cracks, making sure no child went hungry, ensuring that kindness was always met with more kindness. We also, Marcus said with a grin that took 20 years off his face, bought Ruby's Diner. It's now the Lorraine Williams Community Kitchen, serving free meals to anyone who needs them, no questions asked. The painting Miles unveiled showed a scene Keisha remembered perfectly. 3 small children sitting in a diner booth, looking up at a waitress with expressions of hope and gratitude. But in Miles' artistic interpretation, the waitress was surrounded by light, and behind her stood a host of other figures. Dr. James Henderson, Lorraine Williams, Jerry, and dozens of faces representing all the lives that had been touched by her simple act of kindness on a cold November night. Miss Keisha, Maya said softly, you saved our lives. But more than that, you taught us what it means to be human. Every life I save as a doctor, every family Marcus helps with housing, every piece of art Miles creates that shows the beauty in ordinary kindness. It all started with you feeding 3 hungry children. Keisha looked at these 3 remarkable adults who had once been frightened children rummaging through her dumpster, and she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, complete and perfect joy. You didn't have to do all this, she said, but she was smiling through her tears. Yes, we did, Marcus said, echoing words she'd spoken to them decades earlier. Because that's what family does. And because the world needs to know that kindness matters, that it multiplies, that it comes home. As the sun set over Atlanta that evening, The Henderson family gathered on their front porch, all of them, including Jerry, who at 85 still insisted on being involved in every family celebration. They watched little Emma play with blocks on the porch while the adults shared stories and laughter. "Grandma Keisha," Emma said suddenly, looking up from her toys, "Mommy says you're a hero." "What's a hero?" Keisha looked around at her family, the daughter who had grown up to be a teacher, the 3 children she'd adopted who had become leaders in their communities, the man who had opened his home to all of them, and now this new generation that would carry their legacy forward. "A hero," she said finally, "is just someone who sees another person who needs help and decides to help them. That's all. It's not about being special or brave or having superpowers. It's just about caring enough to act." "Could I be a hero?" Emma asked. "Baby," Keisha said, pulling her granddaughter onto her lap, "you already are. Every time you share your toys, every time you're kind to someone who's sad, every time you help without being asked, you're being a hero." As darkness fell and the family began to head inside, Keisha remained on the porch for a few more minutes, thinking about the impossible journey that had brought them all to this moment. From a cold night behind a diner to helicopter rides and community centers and 3 successful adults who called her mom. What act of kindness could you do today? The question echoed in her mind, the same question she'd been asking herself for 27 years, ever since the night she'd decided to feed 3 hungry children instead of walking away. She'd learned something important in all those years. Kindness wasn't a one-time transaction. It was a way of living, a choice you made over and over again, a seed you planted every day trusting that someday, somehow, it would grow into something beautiful. Sometimes that growth took decades. Sometimes it arrived with helicopter blades and answered prayers, and the kind of reward that only comes to those who love without counting the cost. But whether it took 20 years or 20 minutes, whether it came back as helicopters or simply as the knowledge that you'd made one person's day a little brighter, kindness always mattered. It always came home. And in a world that often felt dark and hopeless, that was perhaps the most important truth of all. That ordinary people, doing ordinary acts of love, could change everything. One scrambled egg at a time. From that November night when a waitress fed 3 hungry children to the day a helicopter landed in her yard, Keisha Williams Henderson learned that kindness is never wasted, love is never lost, and sometimes, if you're very lucky and very good, the seeds you plant in darkness grow into forests of light. The Henderson Community Foundation continues to operate today, ensuring that no act of genuine kindness goes unrecognized and no child goes hungry. Because some stories don't end, they just begin again, one act of kindness at a time. Thank you so much for watching this story all the way to the end. If this touched your heart, then you're going to love the next one. It's just as powerful and even more intriguing than you can imagine. So don't stop here. Click the video showing on your screen right now and continue the journey. I'll be waiting for you on the other side of that story. See you there.